Hello and let's talk about press freedom in India. India is at 142 on the new World Press Freedom Index among 180 countries. This is 2 places below its ranking last year. The index is released every year by Reporters Without Borders. The organization said that the communications blockade imposed in Kashmir was a major factor in India's slipping in the index. India's neighbours Bhutan, Nepal and Sri Lanka are all ranked above it. Norway is at the top in terms of press freedom according to the report. Pakistan is at the 145th position and Bangladesh is at 151 among the 180 countries. The index says that while there were no murders of journalists in India in 2019 as opposed to 6 in 2018, there have been, to quote, constant press freedom violations including police violence against journalists, ambushes by political activists and reprisals instigated by criminal groups or corrupt local officials. The government was clearly not happy with the report. Union Minister of Information and Broadcasting Prakash Javadekar tweeted that the media had absolute freedom in India and, to quote, we will expose sooner rather than later those surveys that tend to portray bad picture about the freedom of press in India. We talked to journalist and media expert Paranjoy Guha Thakurta on this issue. Paranjoy, thank you so much for joining us. This is a strange phenomenon, if I may say so, because the ranking has slipped for the year 2019, which was the year India actually had a general election, which is the most important event in a democracy. The number of deaths of journalists actually decreased as opposed to 2018. And yet we have India's ranking coming down. This is a very, very bad sign as far as India's democracy is concerned.
You see, this survey that has been done by Reporters Without Borders, that is the Reporters Sans Frontières, India has dropped two places essentially between 2017 and 2019. This is the 2020 report.
Right.
If you go back a little bit, every year over the last 3 years, India's position has slipped by about 2 places. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it over a decade or so, it's slipped about 20 places. And then it's just slipped about 9 places in the last 4 years alone. So the point to note is that India's neighbors, Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka are ranked higher. But it doesn't really mean anything when you say 6 journalists were murdered in 2018 and none in 2019. The fact is, if you look at it over a longer period of time between 2014 and 18, there have been close to 200 attacks on journalists. And what is very, very clear is that whether it be police violence, whether it be violence by criminal groups and gangs, whether it be by corrupt government officers or people who are, trying to who are working at the behest of these corrupt officials. There could be politically influential people or government people or those in the bureaucracy. All of them are all contributing to an atmosphere of fear, where journalists, especially if they are located outside the major metropolitan areas, in smaller towns, in remote areas, who are also working perhaps for smaller media outlets, for websites, all of them have become far, far more vulnerable. And when India's Minister for Information and Broadcasting, Prakash Javadekar, says there's absolute freedom and that the government would, quote unquote, expose those who are portraying India in a bad light, I'm kind of reminded of Indira Gandhi in the middle 70s, where everything that went wrong with the country was blamed on the hidden hand, the so-called hidden hand. I think if you look back in time, after the 70s, after the middle of the 70s, really that 19-month period between June of 1975 and January 1977, by January 77, Indira Gandhi had eased press censorship, and March 77, she lost the elections. We've never seen such a large section of the media in India so subservient to the ruling dispensation. Now, you can explain why this has happened. You can say this is because dependence on government advertising, government other kinds of government benefits have gone up.
Right.
That's one part of the story. The other part is the general financial crisis across the media, across the world,
Right.
and also the growth of the social media. So combination of all these factors have resulted that irrespective of what the government may claim, those who exercise their right to free expression, a fundamental right under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India, they are under threat. If not physical threat, financial threat, threats of lawsuits, threats of legal action that sends a chilling effect, or a combination of all these factors end up constraining, stifling free speech, sending out, having a chilling effect on those who are critical of the government.
Right.
And the government, Mr. Javadekar can say what he likes, but the truth is that I think never before since the middle 70s has such a large section of the Indian media become so slavish
Exactly
to the government. And I mean, this is a favorite analogy I draw. When L.K. Advani, who's now 92 years old, he was Information and Broadcasting Minister in Morarji Desai's government. He was asked why so many editors had bent over backwards to please Indira Gandhi. He remarked that when they were asked to bend, they crawled. Today, such a large proportion of media owners, editors, senior journalists are crawling even without being asked to bend. That is the new aspect of what is happening in the media.
And right now, this debate is all the more important because we have the COVID-19 crisis going on. There should be a larger regime of accountability. We haven't had a single press conference from the Prime Minister so far, only speeches and announcements. And yet again, this makes you wonder how a democracy can function in the midst of, say, a crisis like this, when the media is almost functioning with one hand tied behind its back.
You're absolutely right, Prashant. After COVID-19, we are going to see free speech becoming further constrained. And it's already happened. I mean, people are being asked to just report what is being handed out by government spokespersons.
Right.
Questions are not being entertained at all. You know, I mean, the role of the media at a time when the pandemic is accompanied by an infodemic, to use the words of the WHO, the World Health Organization Director General, we are finding fewer and fewer journalists are today asking questions to those who are in power. Most are just lapping up, just blindly reproducing the handouts. I mean, take the most recent controversy about who pays for migrants when they go back, who pays the railways. And after the Congress Party, after the Communist Party of India, Marxist says that the government should not be charging money from migrant workers. And after the Congress said, we will pay them, suddenly, you know, they react, they get, the BJP gets very excited, and then they put out all kinds of half-truths. 85% has been subsidized. 85% was always subsidized. And so few journalists are willing to ask questions.
Right.
The Ministry of Home Affairs, the Home Secretary, Ajay Bhalla, puts out a statement before the Supreme Court saying there is not a single migrant labor worker on the street. I mean, who is he lying to? But there are so few journalists. There are a few. Yes, Barkha Dutt is one of them. There are many other journalists who Ajit Anjum, among others, they've actually hit the roads. They're actually saying, look, this is what's happening. There are people who are on the road. They are walking hundreds of kilometers. People are dying. There are some newspapers who are reporting it. Ahmedabad Mirror has been reporting from Gujarat. Indian Express has been reporting. But the short point is, these reporters and these media outlets comprise a very, very small portion of the total media in this country, which has become very, very slavish and blindly subservient.
Right. Thank you so much, Paranjoy, for talking to us. In our next segment, we take a look at the rising number of cases of COVID-19 in India. The country, or at least parts of it, is slowly beginning to move out of the lockdown. But the steady rise in the number of cases continues. We see what Newsclick's Prabir Purkayastha has to say on this issue. Prabir, thank you so much for joining us. So, the Ministry of Health numbers today morning at 8 a.m. said that in the last 24 hours, almost 3,900 cases have been recorded and 195 deaths have been reported. So, this is a considerable number. So, how do you sort of evaluate the progress of the disease in India, especially in the recent week or so, the last couple of days? And what are the reasons for this number remaining at a consistent high?
You know, unfortunately, we are at the moment getting out of the lockdown in various ways. Relaxation is occurring, but at the same time, we don't still seem to have a handle on the numbers.
Right.
Now, that is a very serious issue because we had been saying for some time in Newsclick that just lockdown is not going to be enough. You need extensive testing. Our testing figures may appear high compared to what we were doing earlier, but in terms of what our numbers really are, they're not high. In fact, they are quite low at the moment. So we need to really test it up, ramp it up to at least 10 times the number. And we need to be able to isolate the people and need to follow up the tracking of the people much more. So these are the things we haven't done. Now, of course, there is a price you pay economically, livelihood terms, and obviously the poor have been bearing the brunt. So increasingly, this kind of lockdown is becoming untenable. And the consequence of that, you're actually relaxing it because you really have no other option. Now, if we look at the numbers, let's go back to the numbers. At 46,000 people, roughly 46,500 odd people who are cumulative infected, if we see the number of 3,900, which is the last 24 hours you talked about, that's about 8%, 8 point some percent. Now, this gives us a doubling rate of between 8 to 9 days. Now, if you look at what was happening, say about 4 or 5 days back, it looked like our curve or the graph was flattening. Now it seems to be climbing a little bit again. So what would have been at that time 9 to 10 days, 10 days doubling, we are back to about 8 days doubling rate. Between 8, basically maybe 8.5 days doubling. We are really there. Now that does not show a handle on it, because if that keeps up, then within the next 8 days, you're going to see another 46,000 tally added, which means our numbers are going to be 90,000 or so. And this does not take into account that certain states, the number of tests numbers are low. Now, one of them the government has highlighted today is West Bengal. Of course, they're not highlighting certain other states. That's, for instance, UP, what are the test figures? We'll not get into that. The issue is, yes, wherever the death rates are high and the number of infections do not match up to that, then you have a suspicion that maybe you're not catching those who are infected early enough. And we had said that about Gujarat earlier. The Ahmedabad death rates now prove that it was really far more widespread than what Gujarat government believed. And now we are seeing the numbers go up quite steadily. And Gujarat has become the second most infected state. So yes, there are states like West Bengal. I think UP, we'll have to see how that goes. So all of these states, I think, are still in a stage where the numbers can be deceptive. So we have the double whammy. One, the actual numbers are going up, and that's really when you are getting into Ahmedabad, you're getting into Indore, and then you see that, yes, these are the two cities which are really going up. Ujjain is, of course, also there, but really I'm taking Indore, Ujjain in this case as if it's one city. Now, if you see that this is the likely scenario, then I think we are again at a very risky stage where there are certain cities which are going up, certain states which are under testing, therefore they're not really seeing their true numbers. And I do expect in the next 8 to 10 days when lifting of it takes place, you might see a more widespread infection than what we're seeing now. You see, what we're seeing as the actual infected, that the real numbers of those who are really going to be infected, you're going to see only after 2 weeks of lifting the lockdown, for a very simple reason. Somebody who's infected today is going to show the symptoms after about 10 to 12 days. So the next 2 weeks are still, you will see the lockdown figures. You won't see beyond that. And when you see beyond the lockdown figures, then I have real concern that you might see a really rapid rise unless government tries to do what you've been saying from the beginning: identify hotspots, test extensively, isolate the people, isolate those who come into contact. So contact tracing, isolated testing. These are the three things we have to do, which we're not doing enough. And 10 times the numbers have to be tested. How we can do it in the next 10 days is the challenge.
Thanks, Prabir, for talking to us. That's all we have in this episode of Let's Talk. We'll be back tomorrow with the latest news developments of the day. Until then, keep watching Newsclick.